I'm excited to bring back to the show Dylan Blaha. Dylan is a combat veteran. He is in the National Guard right now. He's a cancer research scientist, former candidate for U.S. Congress, and most relevant to our discussion today, the new state director for Let's Address Illinois. If you followed along, you know that I've built Let's Address This over the last 2 years. April is our 2-year anniversary. From a humble platform with a couple of hundred subscribers to now nearly 200,000 subscribers, more than 2 million readers per month on a national scale. We are focused on social justice, on human rights, on politics, and being unapologetic. And it's, lo and behold, grown rapidly. We've become one of the fastest growing and most trusted platforms on the interwebs. Check us out at qasimrashid.com. You can subscribe for a cup of coffee a month, but we have no paywall. So even if you don't subscribe as a paying subscriber, you get full access to all of our human rights content, political content, social justice content. We have been able to build up resources to now hire writers and researchers and journalists on the local level. And Dylan is the first of those. We'll be launching Texas very soon as well, and then building state by state beyond that over these next few months and years until we are covering all 50 states. But this is the first step forward in that, made by your support, made possible by your support. And we're going to talk in length about just, who he is, what he's going to be working on, and what you can expect out of him. If you're watching on YouTube or on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Grateful to welcome back to the show, formerly a candidate for Congress, now a colleague with me on Let's Address This. Dylan Blaha is a combat veteran, active duty in the National Guard right now, a cancer research scientist, and the state director of Let's Address Illinois. You guys have followed Let's Address This nationally for years, and now we are expanding on the state level. Your support has allowed me to hire amazing leaders like Dylan, and I'm grateful to have him on the show now, not as a candidate, but as a colleague. Dylan, great to have you here, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. There's a lot in Illinois that has not been covered, and I've witnessed that firsthand as a congressional candidate. So, you talk about things like social justice and human rights. Those are things that are often ignored on the Illinois stage. So excited to be here.
It's ignored kind of across the country. I was doing research in this, and as I was kind of building the platform for where do we take Let's Address This, because nationally, we're doing really well. We've got nearly 200,000 subscribers. We are getting more than 2 million readers per month. And the biggest complaint I kept getting was, hey, I need more clarity on what to do with my local state election or who to vote for Congress in this primary. And when you do the research on this, you find that since 2000, local media has been decimated by more than 75. It doesn't exist anymore because they're being bought out by these big billionaire conglomerates. And we're seeing that happening in real time. And so it became extraordinarily and just painstakingly clear to me that we need to hire people to build out that state model. And you're kind of the tip of the spear in that sense, Dylan. You're leading the first state. And so if you're watching this, if you're listening to this and you're from Illinois, make sure you go to Let's Address Illinois and subscribe to Dylan. And let's talk about kind of what are some of the local stories, because we've been talking offline. What are some of the local stories that you've already been seeing on the state level that deserve more attention that simply are being ignored right now?
I mean, one, I know a lot of my friends who go to Broadview who really try to highlight the atrocities going on there. And I think any news about ICE is ignored on the local corporate media level. I have a friend, Corey Davenport, who used to have an organization called the Sunken Press down in Alton, Illinois, near St. Louis. Now he's started this other Substack called the Lovejoy Desk. And, Corey has maybe 300 emails from around there, but he's pumping out news that nobody else is really covering on a daily basis. And there's things, this is kind of a developing story that I'll write on probably in a few days, but, a Republican downstate who is currently in Madison County Jail for writing a strongly worded email saying that he was against genocide, against Epstein files to his state senator. And he sent those emails on a Saturday. They arrested him on Election Day. It took 2 days to figure out what to even charge him with. And now he's being held without bail while alleged sex offenders next to him were granted bail. So they switched a far-right judge in. And these are just things that aren't covered. Even in Champaign-Urbana, very progressive town, barely covers things like No King's Day because they don't want to show that there is a resistance.
Yeah, and that's where I ask folks to invest as well and to become paying subscribers if in their capacity. One of the principles we have, Dylan, is we don't put up a paywall. And so I tell folks that by becoming a paying subscriber, you get no special access to writing or journalism that you wouldn't have access to already. You should become a paying subscriber because you believe in local coverage, because you believe in investing in a more educated local community. One of the other pieces of legislation that we should talk about that can have major national impact is the Rifle Act, which is legislation in Illinois that holds gun manufacturers accountable for the damage that those guns cause. And
A
one of the
novel idea.
geniuses, what's that?
I said a novel idea, but it shouldn't
Yeah, I
be.
mean it's worked in the tobacco industry, it's worked in the alcohol industry, it's being applied in the pharmaceutical industry. Why not here? I mean, it works in the car manufacturer industry. Why not here as well? And if we can be successful in covering this, there's no reason why this can't be a nationwide piece of legislation. And you, as a combat veteran, would love to hear your thoughts on gun safety legislation, the way we should be thinking about this.
I think it's brilliant. I've been lucky enough to work with some of the folks that have put the Rifle Act together. They gave a great forum down in Champaign-Urbana. That was one of the first ones that they did. So I attended as a congressional candidate. And most of the guns that are used in violence cases in Illinois come from outside the state. So just another reason that, but us as taxpayers, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like $1,800 of our taxes every year goes directly towards gun violence. So imagine if that money actually went back to you in the form of healthcare or education, anything like that. And just, we witness, I've heard it all campaign, no one sees their tax dollars come back to them to benefit their community. And so I was stationed in Europe for 3 years. They're okay with high taxes because they see the benefit.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see taxes raised on anyone but billionaires until we start to see that benefit in the United States,
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the greatest tricks that corporate Democrats and Republicans have pulled on people, in that they use this disinformation tactic of higher taxes, when the only people that would be paying higher taxes are people making more than 10 million a year, which is like 0.05% of society, and they can afford to pay higher taxes. The rest of us wouldn't be paying higher taxes. The rest of us would ensure that the taxes we pay come back to serve the needs of the actual community. And going again with the gun legislation, I remember when Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, he passed a red flag law, which, for those who aren't familiar with what red flag laws are, these are is important, critical pieces of legislation where if someone is exhibiting violence or engaging in some kind of domestic abuse, they can have their firearms temporarily taken away from them until, or if they're threatening self-harm, firearms are I think the number one method for death by suicide. It allows a judge to issue a warrant through due process of law to say, hey, Qasim isn't doing well. We need to take away his firearms until he's in a better spot. And then when I'm in better. And so they're proven pieces of legislation, and they work. They're effective. They don't violate the Second Amendment, decrease death, and they increase freedom and prosperity, because last I heard, being alive is a free thing. And Mike Pence, former vice president, passed this when he was governor of Indiana. When I lived in Virginia 7-8 years ago, the state legislature and the Democrats passed a carbon copy of Mike Pence's law, right? A carbon copy. And what did Republicans in Virginia do? They lost their minds that this is a gun grab, this is anti-Second Amendment, this is tyranny, this is fascism. And what the lesson I learned from that point was that we are not going to get a good faith argument from Republicans on this issue. And so we just need to follow the science, follow the facts, and pass the kinds of legislation that we need. And I think, again, going back to why your role as state director of Let's Address Illinois is so important, is that right now we don't really see any statewide media outlets consistently sharing the correct information. The Safety Act is another example of that, where there's still so much disinformation, and we're not seeing any concerted pushback to counter that right now.
Well, and Democrats, I've said this is my major issue with Democrats across the spectrum, is that they fail on messaging everywhere. We saw it with the Harris campaign. We've seen it with defund the police over the years, but just with everything, it's about reshaping those arguments. Because I'll say, hey, platforms like the one that Zoran ran on in New York can work everywhere, but you need to tailor that messaging to what is important to the people of your district, your community, and prioritize what you want to prioritize.
That's right.
Because it's just, everything is so partisan, so divisive, because Republicans have a great way of pointing out what the problem is and then proposing a way to make it worse. Democrats just say there's no problem. And so neither one is working very well.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, speaking with Dylan Blaha, Illinois State Director for Let's Address Illinois Social Justice, Human Rights, and Politics platform. And just to kind of build upon that, one thing that we learned from the 2024 election and the 2020 election, the 2016 election, is that you're not going to be successful running as Republican light. You just need to have a bold, progressive policy agenda and then just go after it and be aggressive in going after it. Right now, it should be a damn shame for Democrats that the party, if you were to ask 100 random Americans, forget party affiliation. In fact, I'll even do one better. Take the most staunch, loyalist Democrat. You ask 100 different Democrats, what does the party stand for? You're going to get 100 different answers. You're not going to get any clarity on what the party actually stands for. And that's a problem. If you go into McDonald's and you ask them what's their flagship burger, they'll tell you it's a Big Mac. You go into Burger King, they'll tell you it's a Whopper, right? I mean, every organization has a flagship brand. What is it with Democrats? We don't actually know. And that's part of the problem, because if the only thing you're running on is, hey, we're not MAGA Republicans, that's not a winning message. And even right now, despite the fact that Republicans have one of the lowest and worst approval ratings and Donald Trump is way underwater, Democrats somehow still have a worse approval rating. How do you even have you thought about this? How do you make sense of that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I have an article coming out later today on Let's Address Illinois that talks about this a little bit with my own realization, right? Because I was upset with anti-immigrant votes, anti-trans votes, continued votes to arm Israel's genocide in Gaza. And these are from Democrats in Illinois, in a very blue state.
Yeah.
And it really all goes back to money. You look at their open secrets, which not a lot of people have time to do. And then you say, oh, well, with the money from defense contractors and big oil and the housing lobby, there's no wonder we're always going to war. The housing market never changes. And so at the end of the day, Democrats are complicit in MAGA fascism, period. And so that is why I think it's amazing that you want to target states that have the highest population, especially really blue states like California, New York, and Illinois. We deserve to have great progressive leaders. And in Illinois, outside of Delia Ramirez, who really is there on a state level?
Yeah.
Hopefully, Juliana Stratton will kind of be that progressive leader in the Senate, but we haven't gotten that from Durbin or Duckworth either.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to a point you made earlier about Zohran Mamdani. And I think you'll agree with me here that he's often maligned as, well, he's just too far left progressive. Those ideas won't work anywhere else in the country. And I point out that the affordability agenda that he's talking about is not something unique to New York City. No. Lack of affordability is a problem everywhere. And the election results actually prove it. And when you look at I was just looking up the election results right now, he won with 51% of the vote in a three-way race up against a corporate, centrist, center-right Democrat and an actual Republican. The Republican, Curtis Sliwa, got 7%. Cuomo, with his absurd, I think 23 billionaires backing him, got 41%. And Zohran beat them both combined. And if this was a true one-to-one race of Zohran versus Sliwa, Zohran probably would have gotten 90% of the vote. There's no doubt about it. And that's my point, that 90% in New York City is still 60% in rural Virginia. It's still 60% in Ohio or in Maine. And we're seeing Graham Plattner right now in Maine running on basically the exact same platform as Zohran Mamdani. You would be hard-pressed to find any kind of differentiation. Plattner is calling it a genocide. Plattner is saying stop funding Israel and AIPAC. He's calling for overturning Citizens United. He's calling for universal health care. He's calling for a $25 minimum wage. I mean, it's really carbon copy. And this is Maine, for God's sake. He's up 30 to 40 points in the primary against the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, and he's up 8 to 10 points against, Susan Collins, who must be very, very concerned right now. So all this rant to kind of form into the question, how do we convince, I'm not worried about convincing the Hakeem Jeffries of the world. They're not going to be convinced, right? He reminds me of, I think it's a Mark Twain quote, I could be wrong, where he says something to the effect of, it's very difficult to convince somebody of something when their paycheck depends on them being convinced of the opposite. Yeah. And Schumer, Jeffries, that's what we see out of them. But how do we convince the Democratic base, the masses, of two things? One, that this corporate centrist strategy is a failed model. Two, and these are the people I'm even more interested in, the people who have almost given up, who say, you know what, just voting just doesn't matter anymore. I'm sick and tired of being lied to. How do we convince them to get back involved?
I think we're a lot closer than you'd think, especially with social media, shows like your own, Substacks like your own. They're moving the base in a better direction. I think in Illinois, part of the problem was we had an overwhelming number of people come out that are still just uninformed. I was flipping people on election day by just telling them that Representative Budzinski takes APAC money or corporate money. That is enough. And so, but they know those things are bad with Chuck Schumer, with Hakeem Jeffries, but they don't connect their own local corporate Democrats to the same problem. So number one is just we're always not going to have as much money as a corporate Democrat. So how do you make sure that you run a positive campaign based on populist ideas while also making sure that you're able to point out the flaws in the other candidate? And that's something that I know I just wasn't able to do because I didn't have enough money. But Graham, I think the way that he is leading that campaign is something that would work in any rural area, right? Like you said, universal health care, affordable housing, fighting back against AI data centers and the jobs that they're taking. And if you're asked about immigrants and trans people, yeah, I want to abolish ICE and go back to the INS, some humane form of immigration treatment while increasing pathways to citizenship. I'm not going to let you attack trans people because I defend human rights and civil rights, and that's what I'm all about, both in the United States and around the world. Like, you don't lead with that, but you make sure you have a firm answer and have a back.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love everything you just said there. And my thing is, even lead with that. I mean, you know, the question here is really the standard here is human rights. I think the Democrats need to stop worrying about, corporate Democrats or just politicians need to stop worrying about understanding every nuance of a person's personal decisions before they can recognize the humanity of a person. I'll say this very clearly. I don't understand everything that goes on in the mind of a trans person, but I don't need to recognize their humanity and recognize their personal bodily autonomy. That's really what should matter in this point. And I think that's the part where I see politicians stumble and stutter and get upset and be like, well, what if they ask me about? It's not your fight. First of all, your fight should be on the human dignity of a person, and the rest of it we can figure out. But if you're ceding ground on whether they're human beings, whether trans people are human beings, well, then we've already lost the battle. It doesn't matter what you say after that. And that's where I'm like, we got to get away from these culture wars. Same with immigrants and undocumented immigrants especially. If your first question is not whether they deserve basic human dignity and due process of law, but there might be criminals and rapists, and therefore we have to vote for the Lake and Riley Act to deny them due process, you've already lost the plot. And it's already game over. And you've done two things that are very destructive. One, you've let Republicans and MAGAs know that the slightest bit of pressure will get you to give up your principles and values and capitulate to whatever the hell they want you to do. That's one. And then I think even the more dangerous one is the ratchet effect. Because now your base, who you're supposed to be fighting for, says, oh, this guy's just some schmuck who doesn't have a spine. Why the hell am I going to show up? And so then it further strengthens right-wing fascism. And so that's where kind of my fury is at these corporate Democrats. My congressman is Bill Foster. This is a guy who's been in office 8-9 terms, hasn't passed a single piece of legislation, voted 3 times with Republicans to gut the ACA, voted to gut disability rights. Because if we know there's one group that has too much power in this country is disabled people, and has voted to bail out banks, voted with Trump to deregulate banks, but because he's a sweet old man who keeps his head down and doesn't make any ruckus, people think he's a good Democrat. He's actually a Republican, and I'm pretty sure a racist, but people let him slide. And I'm just tying it back to Let's Address Illinois because there's no one in local media willing to call this out and educate people that this guy is a corporate puppet. He's not out for your best interests.
Yeah, I don't know if we can make corporate establishment Democrats vote the right way.
We can't.
I've thought about this for a while.
I don't think we can.
Yeah, we need to vote them all out because at the end of the day, I know some people who work on Budzinski's team, and they would say she would have 2 meetings, one with the staff, and she would say, oh, okay, I'll vote this way. And then one meeting with consultants and special interest groups. And then more often than not, that vote was flipped in the way of billionaires, in the way of Israel. You wrote an article about it, HR 7006. And 150 Democrats, including a bunch from Illinois, voted for this bill. It gave $3.3 billion to Israel. What else did it do? It attacked women's rights. And these are issues that I didn't think that Democrats would be walking back on so quickly. But, they preach bipartisanship at a time when one party has transitioned from a conservative party to a fascist one. And it's shocking and yet also not that shocking.
Yeah.
So, we need to build a better party by 2028, because if we don't get a president that is willing to implement change as fast as Donald Trump did, but in the way of good, if we don't have leaders in every state who are willing to support that legislation, people are screwed. I mean, working people, they're losing their health care. Their student loans are coming out of their paychecks. Everything is unaffordable. Gas is now probably $7 a gallon somewhere in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, and also just to build on that, I mean, we're recording this when we don't know what Trump is going to do with Iran, but everything you talked about, unaffordability, and we're wasting over $1 billion a day bombing children in Iran. It's insufferable. Earlier this week, they killed, Israeli and U.S. bombing killed 25 more people, including 7 children. This is after killing 175 children in an Iranian school, right? Schoolgirls. Like just the rage that I feel at these fascists and racists saying, well, women in Iran are oppressed, so we need to free them by bombing women in Iran. Like, it's the most insane, ass-backwards, offensive, fascist thing that you can say right now. But it's happening in real time, and it's funded by our tax dollars. And when you say, hey, maybe those tax dollars should pay for our health care, then it's, well, you're just a socialist. Like, you're insane. It's just, you can't reason with folks like this. And this is why I'm so fed up with corporate Democrats, and I'm done convincing them. We need just to vote them out, because there's no such thing as being silent on fascism. Either you're anti-fascist or you're complicit in fascism. And I'll go back to Bill Foster for a second. I looked up the bill that he voted on that would have gutted the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this was a bill that he not only voted on, he was one of like a handful of Democrats that voted for it. He co-sponsored this piece of legislation. And what this piece of legislation does is that it would have made it more difficult for people with disabilities who are discriminated against to be able to sue for the discrimination that they faced. It would have made it more imagine going to someone with a disability and saying, yeah, you were discriminated against because of your disability. Now here is an extra hurdle for you to go over. I mean, literally the irony of that statement before you can sue. And I looked at why Bill Foster voted for this piece of legislation, and I looked up articles of disability advocacy groups going and meeting with him and telling him not to. Dylan, it was because you got a $2,500 donation from a corporate retail association that wanted to make it easier for retail stores to be able to deny access to disabled people. $2,500. It doesn't
take a lot of money.
It doesn't. But this is a guy who's worth $20 million, right? Which he brags about. A company he built, a non-union company, by the way, worth $20 million, and $2,500 was enough to convince him that, F them disabled people. Let's throw them under the bus. It's insane to me. And so this is where I'm excited about what we're building here, Dylan, because I think once we get in front of people and share, hey, in this election, here are the 2 candidates. Here is what they actually stand for. Because I'll tell you what, when I ran against Foster 4 years ago, and when I ran against him, 2 cycles ago, I told the journalists involved that, hey, this guy voted against disability rights. He voted against the ACA. And the corporate journalists didn't care. They weren't willing to drill
write about it.
They don't care because they need to access journalism. It's pathetic. It's disgusting. And that's why we're funded not by billionaires or by corporations, but by the people that we're serving. That's what gets me so excited about this, that we're going to be accountable to the people reading our content.
There was a video I watched of Graham Plattner months ago. And he was speaking to a room, and one woman came out, I think it was about immigrants, made a comment, and a bunch of other people in the room got mad at her. And he said, I want to talk about this right now.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
Because people are propagandized, people are misinformed, people are undereducated in this country. And so we can't just look at them as a problem that can't be fixed. Exactly. We have to figure out how to reverse that propaganda and help them unlearn this hatred. And also, this just highlights the failure. I mean, my mom has always been a teacher. And you know why I hated George Bush when I was a kid? I didn't know everything, but I knew that No Child Left Behind was horrible. And so, that is how, if we need great journalism that holds the government accountable, and we need to fix our education system. Otherwise, we will never get out of this moment.
Yeah.
And we will
that story. I remember that story about Graham because as the crowd was like jeering her, he told the crowd, like relax, and then he answered her question, and it was done in such an empathetic way. I think one thing that folks, especially, I'm going to keep picking on corporate Democrats because they're the wealthy in power right now. One thing that they do that just pisses me off is they will not allow people to ask questions unless it's done in the exact right, perfect way. And look, I get this all the time. As an immigrant, as a person of color, as a Muslim, I get questions all the time that are asked in a pretty offensive way. And I could sit there and be offended that, well, how dare you? Do you not know? Well, obviously they don't know. That's why they're asking. And if my first knee-jerk reaction is, how dare you, and just, insult them, then they're going to be further validated that this was not the right way, or this was not a question worth asking. Let me just go back to my safe space and, screw these people. And so for me, we need to be able to have forums where people we disagree with but are genuinely interested in learning are able to ask questions without fear of judgment, without fear of ridicule. And I can't tell you, Dylan, how many emails I get on a weekly basis of people saying, hey, listen, I just don't know how to ask this question, but can I ask you this? And I'm like, sure. And the question will sometimes be just diabolical, right? It'll be like, doesn't your religion say to beat your wife? And I'm like, no, not at all. But I understand why you wanted to ask this question offline and not in public, because people will come at you. And, again, we live in a world where there's so much narcissism and cynicism online that the internet is a terrible place for a lot of reasons. But this is, I think, an area where what Graham Plattner exhibited in that situation, it would have been easy for him to scold her and say, America's about immigrants and how dare you. But the fact that he didn't do that, I think, is one reason why his campaign is doing so well, because he's told people it's okay to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable to one another to be able to truly build. I think as we think about, and we're wrapping up the last couple of minutes here, Dylan, as we think about what your goals are for Let's Address Illinois, we've got midterms coming up this year. And then a year from now, we're going to be, weird to say, assuming we're not in a nuclear holocaust, God forbid, a year from now, we're going to be in the thick of the 28th presidential cycle as well. What are your goals for what you want to contribute to Illinois, the discourse, the politics, the social justice issues, the human rights issues? What do you envision a year from now you look back and be like, yeah, we kicked ass, we did a good job? What does that look like?
I think number one, it means highlighting the people that are already doing the great work, the organizing, the advocacy on the ground. They need to be recognized in some way or form. They need that positive reinforcement. Two, I think it comes from actually educating people on policies that they're deciding on in the state house. We have a Democratic supermajority in Illinois, and there is far too much legislation that is passed that actually helps people. And you know why? Because there's pro-life Democrats, and they're actually Republicans. But there's
far too little legislation. You're saying you said far too much.
Far too little legislation that's passed. And so are we going to highlight ICE bills that are finally passed to hopefully stop them somehow in Illinois? Yeah. But I also want to make sure I highlight the anti-BDS legislation that's been around since 2015 and figure out why we keep investing Israeli or American money in Israeli bonds. But I think the last thing I really want to do is I want to make sure that we have a way to fight back against all the hate in our country. Our country was founded on these ideas of equality, freedom, opportunity, and democracy for all. And it's never been for all. It's mainly been for rich white men. And so as we work to build a country that is actually for all, as we fight against anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, counter new anti-Semitism that's really rising because of the state of Israel, we have to fight back and challenge these narratives and hit people with the hard truths as much as possible. That places like, I live in the city of Urbana, and Urbana is a very progressive town. There's redlining there too. There's racism there too. And so how do we fight back against it? How do we highlight these sundown towns that are still around in Southern Illinois and push people like J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois State House to pass better legislation that actually helps the people of Illinois?
I love that. I mean, this point about meaningful calls to action is so important. And I would even add to that, I would be willing to bet, Dylan, would be happy to be proven wrong on this, but I'd be willing to bet that if you surveyed 100 ordinary folks and asked them what is redlining, the majority wouldn't know what redlining is. If you ask them what a sundown town is, the majority wouldn't know what a sundown town is. Despite the movie, you ask them what a green book is, the majority wouldn't know what a green book is. And I think these are also opportunities for us to be vulnerable and just keep making this information available in an accessible way so folks understand this is the reality. I remember I was canvassing years ago, knocked on a conservative's door, and pretty wealthy conservative. I mean, lived in a pretty big house, had never heard of redlining. And he goes, "Look, my grandfather was poor, and now I'm doing fine. Why can't black people do the exact same thing?" It was, again, like it was a classic conservative, like ignorant talking point. And again, I didn't want to attack him, and I didn't. But I just said, are you familiar with something? I'm like, there's a number of ways I can answer this question, but how do you reconcile the fact that even though your grandfather was poor, he wasn't held back by redlining in the 1950s, and black people were? He had never heard the term before. He thought I was making it up. I had to literally pull out my phone and show him on my phone what redlining is and recommend some books, The Color of Law among them, to describe what redlining actually is. And this is in the 2020s. This is a couple of years ago. People don't understand these basic, concepts that were formal state policy, formal federal policy that, created these vast economic divides that have become worse and worse to this day. And so I'm excited about what you're going to be able to continue to build and contribute over this next year and beyond. And then I think I'd love for you to talk about this too. What role do you see Let's Address Illinois playing in the elections that we have coming up in keeping our voters informed on basically who the folks are focused on working families and who are the ones focused on corporate money?
Yeah, I mean, in 2026, there's a lot of races where we know that the Democrats are going to win, but I think it's still important to highlight them too. And make sure that people know to get out to the polls. And there are some races where it's a deep red district. We talk about people downstate call her the devil incarnate, but Mary Miller is an IL 15. Jennifer Todd won the Democratic nomination. She's got a tough uphill battle, but we've seen it's a 20-point swing, and we've seen that happen across the country. So it is reasonable that if we get Democrats to come out and vote, we can take out Mary Miller and people like Mike Bost, Darren LaHood.
Mary Miller is, by the way, the woman who, during the January 6th insurrection, praised Hitler for inspiring the youth of Germany and said we need to learn. I'm paraphrasing, but basically said that the Republicans need to learn from Hitler with the way he inspired the Hitler youth. Insane, the fact that she's still in Congress, but this is who you're talking about when you talk about the devil incarnate.
Yeah, but I've said this over and over again, but it's not about electing as many Democrats as possible. It's about electing leaders who fight for the working class. And so in 2028, I don't know who that is right now. There's people like AOC. There's people.
I'll throw Ro Khanna on that list.
Yeah, definitely Ro Khanna. Chris Van Hollen.
Yes.
I would love to see people like that. And there's one thing that a lot of them have in common is a green background on their APAC tracker graphic.
That's right.
That shows that they actually have morals. Because if you can't stand up to genocide, what makes you think that person is going to stand up for you?
That's right.
But we need to highlight these people. We need to make sure that whoever that progressive leftist nominee is, that they win that nomination in Illinois. And I know it can be possible. We've lost out on opportunities where people like Bernie could have won and moved our country in a better direction. But I think the people weren't ready for it then. They're ready for it. They're getting ready for it now. Things like Let's Address This Illinois, other statewide Let's Address This will hopefully move that needle to a place where the people demand it. Because once you know that you want universal health care, once you know that you deserve worker rights that have been eroded throughout the years, and then there's no going back. You're going to stand up for something more.
That's right. Yeah, it's like once you fly first class on a plane, you don't ever want to go back to coach again. And the thing is, with our healthcare, for example, we're paying for first class service, but we're getting kind of back-end service on a global scale when you compare it. Dylan, it's such a pleasure. Let's do this more regularly now that we're officially coworkers. Where can folks find you on social media? How can they follow you? How can they support Let's Address Illinois?
So I changed my handle pretty much across the board to @Dylan T. Blaha, Dylan T. Blaha. And then, Let's Address This is just @Let's Address Illinois on Substack. I changed the handle to on every website because some of them don't allow it to be the full thing to Let's Address IL. So Perfect. you can find us there and help us blow up our Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, and I don't know. I'm gonna try X, but we'll see how the other folks are on there.
We still call it Twitter in this house, but we'll take that
Beautiful. Too. Yeah, hopefully Elon Musk just sells it and we can all go
back to it. God, that would be amazing. Yeah, that's another thing the heyday of Twitter was something to cherish, but unfortunately, that's not where we are right now. Dylan Blaha, State Director of Let's Address Illinois. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or on Substack so we can continue to create this content. My friends, be safe and continue to support us so we can protect your human rights and our democracy. Peace out.